In our gospel reading today, we hear of the interaction between two women related to each other who are both bearing children, along with the weight of that responsibility. The passage omits much needed context that might help for the purposes of preaching on the theme of this fourth Sunday of Advent, which is love, and signified by the angel candle. Much has happened just before Mary shows up at Elizabeth's door. First, we have the foretelling of the births of John the Baptist and Jesus, foretold by the angel Gabriel to two people, Zechariah and Mary. Their responses could not be more different. All those mentioned are people who are seen by God as righteous, living blameless lives. Zechariah and his wife Elizabeth are an older couple who never had children. Mary was quite young and unmarried. These are like people we might encounter every day, but would not necessarily think would be having children. But God had other plans. Isn't that just like God, to reveal God's plans that run counter to what we think might be proper or what we might want? Anyway, the angel Gabriel was sent by God to deliver a message to Zechariah and Mary. Gabriel first visits Zechariah in the temple in Jerusalem as he's doing his priestly duties, burning incense in the sanctuary as an offering. See, Zechariah was a high priest, and his family was on the calendar of performing services, much like we have a rotating schedule of acolytes and readers. No one was allowed in the sanctuary during his duties, so Zechariah is alone. Thus, when Gabriel speaks to Zechariah and says he'll be a father, his response is quite human. Okay, don't get me wrong, God. I'm happy about this, but how can it be? We ain't exactly young. Gabriel shuts him up, figuratively and literally. Nothing is impossible with God, Gabriel says. And to show you that I'm serious, I'm making you mute until he's born. Because sometimes, Zechariah, you have to be silent in order to hear. A month later, Gabriel visits Mary, who's told she too will bear a child. But not just any child, this will be the Son of God. And though she too asks how the impossible is possible, as she's a virgin, the angel offers her an explanation and adds that her relative Elizabeth is with child and in seclusion. And Mary's response, "Here am I, the servant of the Lord. Let it be with me according to your word." This is where the gospel passage that we heard begins. Both women are in self-imposed seclusion from the outside world, in part because of society's expectations. Both women are still in a state of amazement. And based on Mary's well-known response, the song of praise that we call the Magnificat, we get to stand at the intersection of roads that, at least for many of us, only cross at key points in our lives. In this passage, we stand at the crossroads of hope, peace, and joy. Hope in the sense that both women feel the abiding presence of God who's making the impossible possible. Peace in the sense that they are more concerned, more focused on what God has asked them to do rather than what society would have them do. And joy in the sense that they'll be bringing life into the world. And what unites these is what holds these relatives together, what keeps them moving forward and focused with intensity and purpose is the greatest attribute of God, no matter what the world deems as proper, and that is love. But it is more than love for the child each of them bears. It is more than familial support, which gives the other over which each gives the other over the subsequent 3 months. It is more than what the world thinks is possible. And on this day, we are given a chance to reflect on how our reaction to the gifts we are given in this life speak our song of praise, our Magnificat, if I may be so bold, to the God who makes it possible. Because sometimes it probably feels like God plays little part in our lives. See, we have our careers, we have our families, our friends, our houses, our successes, our happiness. It's easy and natural for us to say that we're responsible for that. And besides, we don't have angels showing up on our doorstep to say all this is going to happen, which is probably a good thing because I wonder how that would actually play out. Would we be more like Mary, accepting the call, accepting what happens as God's will? Or would we be more like Zechariah, accepting what happens as God's will, but at the same time placing conditions upon it? I think most of us are somewhere in between those two extremes, because these two stories of pregnancy are metaphors for what happens in our lives. When events happen, they can leave us reaching for a reason or a purpose. Is it God's will that I met my wife Travis at a Curcio event when both of us almost backed out even attending that day? Is it God's will that cancer has gripped a friend of yours, that we got a promotion that we wanted, that death has taken someone we love and we need, or that we received good news about anything? Most of us like to think that God causes the good things in our lives, but we struggle mightily with the idea that God is also causing the trials. I'm going to go out on a limb here and suggest that it's more nuanced than that. Whether God is the source of all these things is not what matters. What matters are two things. First is our response. And the responses of Zechariah and Mary offer the extremes of human reaction to life-altering events. Zechariah and Mary both said okay to the angel, but you can sense for different reasons. Zechariah acquiesced, but Mary submitted. And that leads to the second and the final part, that God is present in what happens. In other words, it's not important whether or not God has a thumb on our scale. What matters is that God is ready to meet you at that state of trial, at that point of success. And the reason God can meet you at that intersection of hope or despair, peace or strife, joy or sorrow, is God's greatest attribute, which is made known to us every moment, whether we know it or not, and whether we want to accept it or not. And that attribute came down from heaven as love for you. So let love rule the day. Amen.